Welcome to the Psychedelic Capital podcast, where we go beyond the headlines in the emerging world of psychedelics and venture capital. Join us for in-depth interviews with the leading investors, entrepreneurs, researchers, and policymakers who are pioneering a new future in healthcare. I'm your host, Ross O'Brien, founder of venture capital firm Bonaventure Equity, author, and lifelong entrepreneur. And I see entrepreneurship everywhere. And as an early investor in this new frontier in life sciences, it is my goal in these conversations to bring you direct access to the thought leaders and pioneers at this defining moment. We are in the midst of a mental health crisis, an addiction crisis. Pain is an epidemic. For the first time now, we have legal pathways to develop psychedelic science and bring a new paradigm of medicine to the patients who need it most. As we imagine this new future, I'm inspired every day by these visionaries that we have the privilege of introducing them to you. So I'm here today with a good friend, a colleague, somebody who's really inspired me with his story, Nick Norris. And as with all of these conversations, they're unscripted to go beyond the headlines, as we talked about. So I'm going to start things off, first of all, Nick, asking you just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm Nick Norris. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, ended up going to the Naval Academy. So I graduated from there in 2003. Went to SEAL training, commonly known as Basic Underwater Demolition, SEAL training in 2003. Graduated with Class 247, entered the SEAL community, and then served on multiple deployments in various leadership roles within the SEAL teams from 2003 to 2013 before I left active duty, and then transitioned off active duty and have been an entrepreneur myself. And I've gone through my own trials and tribulations as a veteran that transitioned into the private sector, and I've gone through my own trials and tribulations in the business world as well. But just really happy to be here today. And I'd say outside of business, I've kind of found myself in an veteran advocacy role, I would call it. Really committed to sharing my story and spreading the message that more veterans and frankly the world needs to hear about emotional vulnerability, connection and connectedness, and destigmatizing mental health, and looking at a whole array of modalities that can catalyze that path to wellness.
Well, I'm excited for you to share your story and tell people more about VETS, an organization that we are really excited about and doing some great work. And as you, Nick, these are unscripted, and one of the things that we like to do is expand our thinking. So
Sure.
We usually kick off the conversation with an oblique strategy. And for those of you who don't know what oblique strategies are, it's a set of cards that was developed by Brian Eno, a music producer, and they are random thoughts to kick off conversation, thinking, creativity. And so the random oblique strategy for our conversation today, Nick, is lost in useless territory.
So, yeah, useless territory. The way that lands for me, it focuses on useless territory. I mean, I personally could tell you that I was lost in useless territory in the frame of mind that I had embraced post-transition. My useless territory, I guess, would have been a lack of emotional vulnerability, detachment and disassociation, and rationalizing that I was well when I knew that I wasn't totally well. And I think useless territory in that example was probably a lack of honesty and transparency with myself about my current status, because I think I was afraid of judgment, and I was afraid to be something that people would judge and to be atypical to what people think a former SEAL or veteran should be. So yeah, totally useless. I've realized that now. I've embraced the latter, the opposite of what I just shared, and it's been formidable in its impact on my life in a very positive way.
So it's funny because here we are talking about useless territory, and yet it is the most useful part of potentially your stories of entrepreneurship. So talk to us a little bit about what that transition period was like, and you talking about this useless territory of thinking a certain way. Like, Was this about vantage point, perspective, experiencing new things?
I was unaware.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was a lack of awareness, and funny enough, as a SEAL officer, we praise our ability to be situationally aware, yet in transitioning off active duty, I probably was situationally unaware of my own state of mind and kind of actions that I was taking in pursuing work after the military, the way I engaged with my wife, and then ultimately my daughter. And I think I was just unaware. I mean, it's not like I was trying to put myself in a bad situation. I needed an outside perspective from somebody or something that I trusted to really shatter that framework that I was operating in.
Help us understand what it was like inside that moment.
So I had embraced kind of emotional detachment as a SEAL in order, and kind of unknowingly embraced emotional detachment, right? Mm-hmm. Emotions actually just got in the way. It was better to be pragmatic and kind of close off emotionally to be able to perform at a high level in a high stress environment. And when I got out...
So it's a skill set that you need to learn in order to be at your best in that environment.
Totally. And didn't even know that I was learning that skill set.
Yeah.
I was just doing, right? I was just being a good SEAL and being a good leader.
Yeah.
And I think you're just a product of your environment. So the environment that I was in was one that did not praise or appreciate emotion, because emotion makes you slower to actually act and make decisions in situations where you cannot take a bunch of time to figure out what you're going to do next.
Sure.
And when you're in a situation where people are being wounded or killed, or the high potential of that situation unfolding, you have to be able to kind of put your emotions aside and make decisions that are going to progress what is going on around you in a positive direction, as opposed to getting bogged down in emotion. And if you got bogged down in emotion in a very high stakes scenario, it would lead to people getting killed.
Is that an assessment of risk in that moment, and then risk mitigation?
Yeah, but it happens super fast, right? I think Doolittle talks about the OODA loop, a naval aviator, famous naval aviator, where he has a loop of orienting, deciding, assessing, and then taking action, and then doing that in a very quick manner in order to kind of risk mitigate and then make a decision quickly, and then figure out where because the situation in a combat environment is so dynamic that you have to go through that kind of risk mitigation cycle so fast to be able to make decisions, because the environment has changed. 5 seconds later, the environment could have changed and completely obliterated logically what would have been a good decision 5 seconds prior to that.
So I love this quote, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Yep.
What it sounds like is, to me, and learning from you in this conversation, in order to be able to succeed with that kind of unknown, high risk, there's no planning you can do once the action starts, the mission starts. It sounds like you have to develop yourself in an unnatural way in order to perform at the highest level with those stakes are so high, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you have to, you're mandated to perform at the highest level. And I'll come back to OODA. It's or observe, orient, decide, act.
Right.
So I'm proper in kind of giving you the acronym. But yeah, no, you have to. Like there's no room for slow, methodical decision making in a dynamic environment. Like it's important to risk mitigate and do that well, but the speed that it happens changes depending on the situation that you're in and the environment that you're placed in.
So we're going to get to the psychedelics part of the conversation, but I think it's really important for people to understand where you're coming from in your journey, right? So we're at the point where now you're moving out of your, service life, right? And it sounds to me like this is a new environment for your readapting, right?
Yep.
Is this where this challenge with self-awareness and things was most evident?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to apply the same kind of emotional detachment and kind of just aggressive pursuit of achievement when I left the military, which thematically that makes sense, right? Like it worked in this career. I'm going to make it work in this follow-on career. Sure. So I just hammered away. Like I entered the workforce, decided that I was going to, I think, set a goal of like being successful, whatever that is.
Sure.
Maybe that at the moment it was just like, I want to make a lot of money so I can take care of my family and make sure that we're stable. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that's their goal.
Right.
Whether they want to admit it or not is like, I want to be successful, I want to achieve. And that usually means earning more to be able to take care of yourself and others around you. So I kind of poured myself into that. And I think unknowingly, that was kind of a coping mechanism for me to just deal with the fact that I have all this emotional suppression going on. Like I never dealt with the death of friends and family appropriately, right? I gave myself like a day to mourn, and then I was locking it away and moving on and being pragmatic. So moving into the private sector, I just poured myself into work to the detriment of kind of relationships around me. The relationship with my wife, ultimately the relationship with my daughter who came along several years
ironically
later.
you're doing all this for.
Totally. Well, and I would actually say that I would rationalize probably to my wife when she would approach me about, hey, like you're different, maybe I'm worried about you, like we're not happy, like there's things going wrong or things that are just unsettled in our relationship.
Sure.
And my rationalizing, my response would be, well, I'm doing this. And it would actually come across as kind of like frustration or edginess, and I mean, maybe anger in a way. Like, I'm doing this for us, for you. And I mean, I was trying to fool myself. I mean, I think I believe that, oh yeah, I'm just trying to do this. I'm trying to do what I've been doing all along, was just perform and achieve. And I think in doing that, I was just perpetuating kind of this cycle of suppressing my emotions because I knew that had led to success in the past. And I figured it's going to lead to success or continued success. But you can only do that so long before
it's a key element of your operating system at that point.
Totally. And it starts, you can only do it for so long before not addressing emotions starts to overwhelm you, and it starts to manifest kind of physically, and it becomes more of a surface level thing. And for me, I framed my conversation with my wife as probably laced in edginess and frustration. Well, and that's how some of this started to manifest for me, when I actually started to be semi-aware that there was something that I needed to address, and I wasn't healthy and I wasn't happy, but it would come across as edginess, frustration with people, anger, where I'm typically not an angry person, and then ultimately apathy, which is the scariest thing to have happen. I mean, people would think that like anger or sadness would be like the thing that you want to avoid, right? In depression or anxiety. But for me, it was just apathy. It was just
what did that look like?
Just a lack of, like a lackluster willingness to just participate in life. I mean, to do the things that drove happiness in my life, connect with people that I love, probably distance myself from people, not purposefully, but just like it just happened. I just didn't want to be around people, and I didn't want to do things that typically would bring joy to my life. I mean, climbing would be like a very simple example. I mean, I've always enjoyed climbing. I still enjoy climbing, bouldering, and I stopped. In physical exercise in general, I had to really force myself. I was just forcing myself to kind of go through the motions, but I just lost this fire, this passion to pursue things that I normally would find a lot of joy in.
When I'm hearing you describe this, I'm seeing some similarities in my own life, much different, right? And I'm sure that there's a lot of common experiences that you're sharing. And look, this is one of the great things about talking to you, Nick, is your willingness to be so open about this, because I'm sure there's people listening that haven't found yet that moment of self-awareness to be able to look in the mirror or look at their situation or look and step back and say, well, wait a minute, how do you find yourself in that? What was it for you? Was there certain experiences or things that were compelling you to step out of yourself in that moment?
I think it was just the fact that I wasn't finding joy in life scared me. I mean, it was just terrifying. And I think I was left kind of feeling like almost helpless. Like I'm trying so hard to fix this issue, but I can't figure out how to fix it. I don't have a clear path. I don't understand what tools I can use to actually change. So I felt lost and I'm not someone that felt lost. Yeah. I always had a plan. I had goals. I knew what tools I needed to achieve those goals, and to feel like I was kind of helpless in that capacity to enact change was really scary. So I think that was catalytic for me. And I remember opening up to my wife when she was away, just getting on a phone call and just letting her know that I'm not doing good, and I need to figure something out. And my first stop was to go to a Western classically trained physician.
Sure.
And just explaining what I'm going through. And right, they looked at it as like, well, this is like a clinical depressive episode. Like you're just depressed.
Right.
And that was confusing to me because I wasn't necessarily sad. I was just not feeling, period. And the solution that they presented was prescribing an antidepressant, which, and I've said this on multiple podcasts and in various interviews, like I'm not demonizing antidepressants. I mean, there's a place for that drug, and I know it's helped a tremendous number of people, but for me, I didn't want to take something as a Band-Aid fix to something that was a deeper issue. And that came from just talking to other friends that had maybe poor experiences with antidepressants where they just felt numb, right? It kind of took away some of the sadness or the anger or the apathy, but they just didn't feel. There was still that detachment, and the detachment, the apathy is what scared me. So if I was going to just take something that was potentially just going to keep me flat, I just didn't want that. And that was my sovereign decision. And I knew that, like, okay, if I'm not going to do this, I need to figure something else out.
Right.
And I think in the moment that physician actually recommended therapy, because I had never done therapy.
Even talk therapy?
Never done talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was exactly what was recommended. And I never made the appointment. So I'm going to hold myself accountable, because if that physician's ever listening, they'll be like, I told you so. Yeah. And I'll be like, well, yeah, you were right. Trust me, years later, like I am one of the biggest advocates of talk therapy, but avoided that. And I went on the path of just trying to problem solve myself. I spoke openly about transcranial magnetic stimulation when I interviewed with Tim Ferriss. Mm-hmm. It's a tool that I utilized.
For those who may not be familiar.
So they are using, and I think it's off-label use, or maybe it's on-label on frontal lobe use for using. Neurostar is one manufacturer of this magnet, and it's using a magnet to create kind of magnetic pulses to stimulate brainwave activity. So if it's depressed, kind of picking it up. If it's overactive, depressing it. And
was that your first exploration outside of the prescribed medications? Okay.
It was my alternative.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I had heard about veterans, and other friends of mine had gone through that, and it had been helpful. And I would say the first time I went through it, it was helpful, but it faded in time. Okay. And I went back 6 months later, and the second time wasn't as effective. It actually caused some agitation, and I just didn't feel like I was getting the result that I was hoping for. So in essence, it was a Band-Aid fix in a different way, but very similar to what I liken to an antidepressant. And at that point, I actually started to feel pretty destitute, right? Because I'm trying to problem solve. I'm finding something that's providing relief, and then it's not providing relief anymore. So I'm like, where do I go from here? And life just takes you down paths that you may have never expected to be going down a certain path. And this kind of frames my story. But, that path that you were walked down, it happened for a reason. And for me, that manifested in just crossing paths with former SEALs that I knew from the community that had explored psychedelics in a controlled, well-curated, supervised environment to be a solution to some of the same symptoms that I've described, the anger, the edginess, the apathy, and they had tremendous results. And I could see the results in interacting with them because I knew them, right? I had interacted with these guys on active duty. And the people I was interacting with were different people, much happier people, more content, more satisfied.
And how are you finding each other? Is this still fairly like on the fringe kind of stuff that like nobody's putting up a website saying, "Hey, here's the database"?
No, I mean that's why I said sometimes you walk paths that you weren't expecting to walk. I mean, it was just casual interaction. It was like unexpected, random interaction with guys that I had crossed paths with years ago, but then all of a sudden I'm at a trade show and we're hanging out at a booth, and the guy works for a new company and he's talking to me, and he just feels compelled to share. Yeah. Right. And I'm sure people that have actually had a peak experience with a psychedelic, I mean, would understand this. You kind of feel it can be so pivotal and catalytic in a positive way that you feel compelled to share. Right. You become evangelical afterwards. There's actually, and it's advice that Tim had given me is like, everybody, after your first big experience, like you're going to want to tell everybody, you're going to want grandma to do psychedelics, right? But you have to kind of temper your enthusiasm and allow it to kind of settle in, because the hard work really comes afterwards. It's integrating that experience, and then it's getting on the path of just simple, effective routines day in, day out.
But for those who are tracking here to the narrative, and I really appreciate you going through this sort of step by step, and I've seen this in other elements and certainly seen it in my own life in certain respects. You're asking for help. You're proactively, you have the awareness to understand that something's not right, and you've kind of hit the limit of what you can tolerate in your life. So those decisions put you on a completely different orientation and open up your aperture to experiencing life in a different way. You may not be feeling relief at that moment, but it doesn't surprise me that when you take that reorientation to going about the next day and the next day and the next day, that you are going to collide with some of these people that are having these experiences.
Yeah, it's bound to happen.
Yeah.
And the hardest part for people is to just gain that initial awareness, right? That something is wrong, or I need to enact change in my life. Because I think the people that I know that have struggled the most or continue to struggle are just kind of caught in that situation where they're oblivious to it, right? They don't realize that they are suffering as much as they are, because it doesn't give them the opportunity to start to seek any type of change.
So I think this is a really good point to pause for a moment and talk about vets in the organization, how people can find you. If somebody's listening to this and they want to learn more, they need to find your organization, maybe let's take a moment and talk about that and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, vetsolutions.org, is a nonprofit that was founded by my good friend Marcus Capone and his wife Amber Capone, basically to provide access to well-monitored, well-curated psychedelic experiences in countries where they're legal for veterans, and specifically special operations veterans, combat veterans that are struggling. And the organization really started in a very grassroots fashion. I mean, it's been 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, but they've been kind of in the underground, kind of making sure that guys have access to grants to be able to get to go on a retreat. And a majority of the guys, and Vets doesn't kind of limit themselves or the people that seek help through Vets to a specific psychedelic, but ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT in a retreat setting have been very prolific for a majority of the patients and the veterans that have come through. But a big part of the organization is really focused on research and political advocacy, because knowing that the organization can only help so many people, they had to be very narrow in their focus to help special operations combat veterans. Only because you need to start someplace. But through political advocacy and commitment to research in partnership with organizations like Stanford and Johns Hopkins, you're able potentially to enact change for a bigger subset of the population. So the organization has really invested a lot of time and energy into that part of the mission in order to hopefully expedite these modalities being available medically and legally in the United States. So, people don't have to leave this country to go seek healing via a psychedelic experience. But yeah, tremendous work is being done. And yeah, I mean, they've helped hundreds, if not approaching 1,000 plus veterans. And frankly, a lot of the veterans that have gone through were either dealing with severe addiction, depression, anxiety, you can frame it however you want. MTBI plays a part in this, concussive injury, chronic sleep deprivation, and exposure to stress, and then a large number of suicidal ideations. I'd probably say 40+% of the patient population is in that category. And maybe it's even higher, maybe that the 60% that it doesn't apply to just weren't ready to share that they've gotten to that low point. But yeah, they're doing tremendous work. I'm so very thankful for that organization and the work that the Capones are doing.
Yeah, it's really important stuff, and great to hear your story and your involvement with this. Maybe let's talk a little bit about your initial experiences with psychedelics and sort of the before and after and some of the things that you discovered through that process.
Sure. I mean, and I won't taint anybody's potential experience if there's anybody out there that is planning on experiencing either ibogaine or 5-MeO, but I can tell you that I never used a psychedelic medicine prior to being introduced to it via vets and in that environment. It's pretty miraculous. I mean, my use of 5-MeO, DMT, and ibogaine transformed me back into the person that I was prior to military service. And I know that because my wife, who I've been with since high school, is the one that gave me that feedback after I came back from having my big experience with ibogaine. I mean, she literally told me that in essence, it had kind of decalcified my heart and had kind of turned the clock back to the kind of person that I always was. And I think we all are. We're all loving, caring, empathetic, warm beings. And we go through life, right? And experiences in life and situations and trauma or whatever.
Okay, get calloused. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, so it removed the calcification. It just kind of brought me back to that kind of uncalcified or close to uncalcified version of myself that I was when we first started dating. And I thought that was a really powerful testimonial because it's really hard to explain the experience. I mean, the experience is beyond language. And there's the very deep psycho-spiritual part of this. I mean, I could go into kind of a strengthened belief in a higher power, and you can call that higher power God, love, or the one.
Yeah.
You know, I think for the first time in my life, I actually felt like I had a relationship with something bigger than myself.
That's profound.
Yeah, I mean, I get emotional talking about it because I truly I think I had a sense of knowing after these experiences that I really never, I mean, I could have said, yeah, I believe in God. I profess to this faith, whatever. I read this holy scripture and I know stories from it, but I didn't feel like I had a relationship. And I felt something that is ineffable that galvanized a relationship in something bigger than me. And it kind of reprioritized my life and put things front and center that are just important, namely my kids in my life. They're a manifestation of pure love and goodness and innocence and kind of that powerful love that I feel for them. There's nothing more important in my life than that. And it was actually silly. I would laugh. I still laugh at myself for how stupid could I have been to be so distracted with all this other stuff in the world.
None of it matters.
None of it matters. Materialistic or any concerns and what's going on in business or turmoil in your life. None of it matters. It distills it down. The experience distilled it down to an intense focus on the thing or things that truly do matter. And that's changed me. It's changed the way that I approach my life, the way I interact with people, where I put my energy, where I spend time. And that's one of the most profound things that come out of it. And granted, you can look at kind of the more pragmatic for those people out there that are looking. I mean, granted, the science is a big part of this now, right? And trying to get these things through FDA trials and get them to medical legalization. There's pretty profound physical healing benefits that are happening, right? I mean, where there's major studies going on with a whole litany of psychedelic compounds. And with ibogaine specifically, I haven't drank really. I tried after I came back from taking ibogaine, and I just had zero desire or craving for it anymore. And I would say maybe I wasn't I didn't frame myself as an alcoholic, but I was habitually drinking, unknowingly try drinking to numb just stress and issues in my life. And I came back from this thing completely obliterated all craving for alcohol, and it's given me clarity of thought and mind, and I'm very thankful for that. I mean, it also feels like it was a reset to my central nervous system. I mean, there was physical things that changed in my body, just kind of functionality in kind of my elbows or my hands that I thought I had lost from a dexterity standpoint. And I'm not a MD, but I had there was a physical difference in just physically how I felt and performed as an athlete afterwards. So yeah, and I think a lot of the research is looking at kind of the neuro-anti-inflammatory benefits of a compound like ibogaine,
Right.
and noribogaine is what ibogaine is metabolized into, and how it impacts inflammation in the brain. And when we look at mild traumatic brain injury, whether it comes from impact, concussive impact, or concussion from blast, or just chronic exposure to high stress and disrupted sleep patterns, you're basically inflaming the brain. And when we look at inflammation in our joints, our shoulder, our knee, we take ibuprofen, we ice
that
it,
masks it,
we do all this stuff. We never do anything about inflammation in the brain because we can't see it, right? Maybe it's manifesting in kind of emotional like different emotional issues, right? Anger, frustration, maybe headaches, inability to have kind of clarity of thought. But we never address it. And I think that there's really profound possibilities in kind of using some of these modalities to reduce that inflammation. And that's probably a big part of what's going on. The subset of special operations guys that are taking ibogaine and seeing such profound benefits. Yeah, sure, there's the psychospiritual component of the experience is a big deal, but I think it's also kind of reducing inflammation.
The physiology of it, yeah.
And the physiology. And so there's actually real science that's being, the compounds are being researched in that capacity to see how maybe these things are. They're stimulating neurogenesis and release of brain-derived neurogrowth factor and just reducing the inflammation in that environment to allow the brain to heal itself.
Look, I think it's such an exciting moment in time, right, where the research is now open, available. One of the things that we're seeing is the quality of researchers that are gravitating to the science because it's so compelling. And I think we're just at the start of a complete new paradigm in not only the research, but how we're handling the biggest issues in healthcare, right?
Totally.
So it's really an exciting moment. It makes me think about there's really two groups of people that we really engage with a lot and learn a lot from. It's veterans and former professional athletes. And we have a number of athletes on our team who you've met, and really great guys and girls. So one of the things that we talk about a lot with them, and I'd like to have this conversation with you, is having these experiences like professional athletics, military service, and then translating that to entrepreneurship, right? So I want to kind of come back to that point in your story where you're now a civilian and you're building a successful career. You've got goals in mind. You want to support your family. There's the stuff that we talked about that doesn't matter, but it does. I'd like to hear your experience and where these similarities fit in your entrepreneurial endeavors too.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is my ability to be a good teammate. I think that's what you learn, whether you're in the military or you're an athlete. It's how do you take your skills and be a contributing member to something that's bigger than you, right? And have complementary relationships with those other people on your team to be able to achieve greatness. And you do that in the military. It's like no brainer, right? You have to, right? Everybody has their job. They have their role,
right?
And they perform. Their only focus is to perform extremely well in that role. So the team as a whole is going to excel. And when I left the military, I mean, I think that's been one of my biggest strengths is knowing my strengths, knowing my weaknesses, and understanding how I can complement my weaknesses with somebody else's strengths, and how my strengths can complement their weaknesses. And that's really, I mean, that's the magic into like a successful team, right? High performing teams,
right?
It's just not a bunch of people that are all good at everything. Like that doesn't happen. You need deep expertise in every single area, and you need people that are not just experts in their particular niche, but are willing to understand and kind of like work with somebody else to kind of learn something new and help people grow that might be weak in that environment or in that particular niche. So like I think that's one of the biggest things that I took away from the military. And then I think the other thing that you can label this as either it might be a fault in some situations, but I as much as I started to drift towards it being a fault, I think I've now come full circle. The loyalty that I have. I think it's a rarity in this world to find people that are truly loyal, especially in a work environment.
Interesting. Yeah.
People switch jobs constantly. You don't know if you're going to get true loyalty, you're going to get true commitment from somebody. As somebody in the military, I was very focused on being committed. and being loyal. And when I look somebody in the eye and I shake their hand, or I tell them that, hey, I'm your teammate, or I'm part of this unit, you're going to get everything from me, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to kind of drive forward, and I want to make a true commitment to somebody. And I've taken that loyalty, and I've used it in the outside world. And you got to be careful at times, right? Because some people aren't, maybe they don't have the best intentions, and they'll abuse that loyalty. But it's not something that I'm going to give up on. And I tell that to people that have transitioned. Don't lose that ability to commit and to be loyal, because loyalty is a truly unique and valuable characteristic.
I think this is super interesting because do you find it, certainly I would say from our vantage point, that translates to resilience, right? Mm-hmm. And when you have a commitment to something for the long term and have resilience, the first time something doesn't go well, because it will, everything goes, it never goes back to our comment about first contact, right?
Yep.
The first time something doesn't go well, if you just pull the ripcord and you're quick to not have that sort of loyalty to the long-term objectives, that doesn't look like resilience to me.
Right. No, you have to be resilient. And being committed to something, I mean, that's people in the military or athletes. They're doing very difficult things to achieve things that are very lofty as far as goals are concerned. Yeah. So you have to be resilient. And I think along with the resilience, a deep sense of humility is something. I mean, humility is one of the, outside of loyalty, and like humility is like one of the most important things that I fostered as a leader in the SEAL teams. Like I wanted to always carry myself with humility. Easy to do in the SEAL teams because there's so many amazing human beings that I respect, that were better at me than at so many different things. But to be able to carry yourself with humility in an environment where things are going to go wrong, especially as an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
Things go wrong all the time. You're constantly being dealt situations. You're being disappointed. And to be resilient, to keep going, is one part of it. But then you also should be humble enough to recognize where you've made mistakes. How did the situation go wrong? What could we have done better? Who could I have brought into the fold to help advise me or help us move through this negative experience faster, and then get back on our feet and then move towards that ultimate lofty goal again?
I think it was Jalen Hurts said, we're just doing this right after the Super Bowl, the quarterback for the Eagles, and they lost, right? And I think the quote was, that blew me away, that like asking about the game afterwards, and he says, well, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
Totally.
I'm like, that is it.
And you learn from negative experience.
Yeah.
Like I've said this over and over again. I mean, people always want to know about like, oh, what did you do? What did you do right in the military? Like I can tell you what I did wrong, because those are the experiences in life, whether it's in the military and business. Like I know the experiences that were difficult, where I made mistakes and things turned out to be terrible for a period of time. I mean, those are etched in my brain. And if that's how, I think that's just how our brain is. That's how we wire. We remember those painful experiences, and it's a great opportunity to learn from them, to dissect those experiences and then grow from them. So like without pain, growth doesn't exist.
And humility it fosters humility, I think.
You have to be humble. I mean, to dissect something where a situation where you really mess something up and led to some terrible situation, you have to be a humble person. Because if you're not carrying yourself with humility and ego is overriding everything, you're going to be too proud to even hold yourself accountable, and too proud to even like regurgitate that terrible decision and share it with somebody and let other people.
Sure, you're self-fulfilling a bias that's not going to allow you to evaluate mistakes if you think you didn't make any mistakes.
Absolutely.
And then you continue to make the mistakes, and ironically, it inhibits your success.
Yeah.
So let's talk about success, because you said something earlier as well in your story about having a vision of success in your mind. And I think this is a really important thing for entrepreneurs and just in life, right, in general. Yeah. Working with a therapist, went through talking about what success means to me, right? And absolutely, I'm one of those people, was very ambitious early on. I started my first business when I was 19 and had just a string of failures. And I had always sort of looked at the scoreboard, right? Or visualized a scoreboard in my mind that would have a bank account, a house, fancy cars, whatever, right? None of that matters. And I personally had this epiphany on success a few years ago, which I now define as being able to do this for as long as I can. This being invest in dynamic entrepreneurs, help fund research, science, pioneer true solutions for healthcare's biggest needs. And as long as I can do that for the rest of my days, there's nothing that would trump that I could accomplish.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear from you how success was defined for you early on, how you define it now, and how this narrative has informed it.
Yeah. So I think early on it was achieving goals, right?
Yeah.
Like setting lofty goals and achieving goals, just knocking them down. And yeah, that's great. It probably is the reason I kind of achieved a bunch of the stuff that I achieved. But now, and I'm still achieving things, right? It's not like I just like lay down and I'm just like, oh, whatever happens, happens. Right. So I don't want to frame this inappropriately, but success for me is being connected genuinely with people that I love and they feel the same way about me. So I mean, it's this shared love and respect and connection transcends just my personal life. It transcends that and it bleeds into my professional life. So choosing people that I work with, whether it be a business partner, a client, a consultant, somebody that is like a supporting echelon company that's helping me do whatever we're doing as a company, making sure that the relationship is real and that there's somebody that cares about me, and I want to care about them. And it doesn't have to happen with everybody. I'm not a completely like an altruist in that every single person has to be like your best friend and you have to care about them deeply and all that. But it is important for like those core relationships, professional or business, to have like deep connection, like emotional vulnerability should exist there. People should be unafraid to kind of share deeply with you. And not that you're going to have like a therapy session with your business partners all the time, but it's the only thing that really galvanizes trust. I mean, I firmly believe that, and I put it into practice. I mean, the business partners that I have, I trust them deeply. I consider them friends, and probably more so, I consider them family. And I know that they have my best intentions at heart, and that materialism comes second, and the relationship comes first, and doing the right thing and being principled in kind of how we conduct ourselves comes first. And if I have those type of relationships, I think it just like it leads to success. It leads to success in the ladder where you're achieving
It's
goals.
It's a symptom, not an objective.
It's a symptom of choosing the right people and carrying yourself behaviorally in that construct.
So what stands out for me in this moment is thinking about, again, learning from you and overlaying some of my own trajectory and seeing some of the common threads. I had a string of years of bad partners, employees, things, bad investments. We all make bad investments. And without question, today it's all about the alignment of morals, values, objectives. But it's funny, when I look back at those people mistakes, that was also a period in my life where I wasn't caring for myself. Right? I wasn't treating myself in the way I wanted to be treated or treat other people.
Yeah.
And I always used to say, one of my favorite characteristics in people is authenticity. All that was me saying, I think I'm an authentic person.
Yeah.
And I was self-medicating and doing stuff that was like completely inhibiting my ability to open my aperture and see the value that I could bring and others could bring. And then it becomes mutual value.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. I mean, if you don't take care of yourself, I mean, you're patient one. Like, you need to be focused on yourself, because like, how can I expect emotional vulnerability and connection from somebody else if I'm unwilling to be emotionally vulnerable?
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's like the most magic thing. If you bring vulnerability into a situation, it typically begets vulnerability, or you find out that somebody's not ready for that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
For sure.
But then you understand that's kind of where I can gauge, like, maybe it's not the right time to invest that much energy and try to push that person, because you can't change people and you can't force people to give you that level of vulnerability and connection. They have to do it on their own.
But the vulnerability also, I think, allows you to have the difficult conversations, which you were just talking about.
Yep.
And if I look back, sort of, again, just personalize it, like 100% of the time when I avoided a difficult conversation, there was a worse outcome.
Mm-hmm.
If I had, if I was willing to take off that Band-Aid and be secure in myself, regardless of the outcome,
Yeah.
everybody benefits from those tough conversations. Even if it's, look, every entrepreneur part of the job is you hire and fire, right?
Yep.
And you put resources together and you build teams and you try to, and then, things fail and then you reiterate and things fail again. You reiterate and you say it. And it's never easy to do that. And you always have to have the personal, the thoughtfulness of another person if you're no longer going to have them on the team, for example. But delaying that decision, not being honest about that decision, and not tackling it head on always, in my experience, made the situation worse, not better.
I agree. And it's never easy, right? It's never easy to kind of look somebody in the eye and tell them something that they don't want to hear. But when they do hear it and you approach it in that way, 9 times out of 10, it turns into a healthy conversation. And people appreciate it, right? Like if you're not hiding something from them. You're not trying to like sugarcoat it. You're not telling them something that isn't true and not allowing them to grow. Because if I'm failing, I would rather have somebody tell me like, why am I failing? And let me try to fix it.
For sure.
And even if I'm being let go, right? Or a partnership's ending, at least I can figure out, okay, you know what? This is over, right? We're not going to be partners. I'm not going to be an employee anymore, but I can figure out kind of what went wrong and just work really hard not to let it happen again. And by having that open conversation, I would say that you're gaining an ally and somebody that's going to vouch for you.
I was just thinking about that 100%.
Totally.
I mean, it's having that awareness, right? Humility. I'm just thinking through, like, we've been hitting on these topics in the whole conversation, right? And coming to mind are several of my partners and investors here today, and there's the group of lifelong, like we're talking decade plus relationships, and we've been in stuff together that didn't go well, right? And it's funny, like, to have some partners that you lose money together, sometimes that galvanizes a collected learning and a collected vision. And then when the next thing does become bigger and better, you can lean in even more. It becomes sort of the price of admission.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the only way to go now, right? Hiding anything from somebody doesn't do you any good.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about that in diligence when we look at companies. Like, I would rather find out, like, every company has components to it that are imperfect, right? I mean, we invest in startups and seed companies. Like, this is the entrepreneur.
Most of them fail.
the vast majority, like, look, if we are really good at what we do, a third of our companies are not going to survive.
Yep.
And we're going at this with real capital, real resources. We think a smart team, great founders. Like, that's just how the deck is stacked.
Sure.
Right. But I think about, and I always say this sort of in diligence, I would rather you tell me, hey, look, here is something that happened and here's what we want to put on the table. Because if I go and find it out on my own, then it raises more questions, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how we're building a relationship.
Well,
together.
trust is eroded immediately, right? If somebody has to find something out
Yeah.
and they were told, I mean, it could be something big, it could be something small, but if it's left unsaid, you've eroded trust, and trust is important. I mean, that's the only thing that you have, right? If you're going to go to battle as an entrepreneur or wherever, you need to know everything. Like, you want to be able to trust the other people and have them tell you the hard things when you don't want to hear them, because it's going to make you better and it's going to make the company more successful.
But I love this because it goes back to what you were saying about not everyone can be good at everything too. And in great teams, if you can trust an individual in their lane to do the best that they can, regardless of what the outcome is. I mean, we talk a lot about, this is a concept I love, that if the systems are sound and if the process is sound, so I said a handful of our investments are not going to win, right? But if we look back and say our process was sound and we went into it eyes wide open and we can't fault the systems, then the outcome's the outcome.
Yep.
Right? And that's staying in your lane, but also collaborating and being part of a broader team.
Yep. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
So we're in violent agreement, which doesn't surprise me. Look, man, this has been such an amazing conversation. We're going to have to do this again.
Yeah, we'd love to.
We're just scratching the surface. To bring it back to Psychedelics Capital, right, which is what we're talking about. What do you see happening? We're here at the beginning of 2023. We're at a watershed moment. How do you and your organization, you personally, look at the next 2, 3, 5 years? And and where should we be investing our time, our money, our philanthropy? Where should regulatory momentum be going? Just are there some broad strokes that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's always been about the preparation and integration.
Okay.
So I think it's the supporting effort movements that are kind of complementary to the psychedelic experience or the psychedelic compound. I think that is where a tremendous amount of growth is going to happen, and it needs to happen because.
So things like clinics, set and setting, talk therapy.
I think it's like the making sure that there's the right integrative support. So like the talk therapy, having the right therapists and coaches, and maybe it isn't just always a PhD or a licensed therapist that's there, but it's kind of growing kind of these like therapist light type roles,
Yeah.
like a
But
a
I mean,
coach.
these are powerful molecules, right? Like this is not to be taken lightly.
Yeah, I think so. Being able to build networks of trusted support personnel to be able to ensure that people are actually able to capture the power of these experiences and enact change in their lives. That's probably the biggest, the most important part of it. Having these people to catch you on the back end and be able to, and it's not just sitting with you during the experience, it's the people that you can go to afterwards to really unwind and kind of analyze the experience. And then again, I'm all about fundamentals. So it's establishing those healthy habits long term that are really going to change kind of the life that you're living. So whether that's kind of picking up a contemplative practice, whether it's meditation or prayer, committing to kind of talking to people, whether that's a therapist or a coach or just a kind of something that can help people be more open and connected and willing to share with the people in their circles, right?
Yeah.
I think that type of kind of social kind of environment or connectedness in order to support the back end of these big experiences is going to be critical to efficacy and future success with the world of psychedelics. Because, I mean, I think where psychedelics fell short before is they emerged and it was all about the psychedelic. It was all about the experience. And we weren't thinking about the preparation, and we weren't thinking about the integrative support that is critical now. So I think that type of enabling effort or an amplifying effort is going to be a huge area that I think there's such a huge need as these things start to permeate kind of medical legalization that I think there's room for a lot of people to do a lot of good work. And I think there's a lot of room for a lot of people to probably make a lot of money doing it right and producing something that's putting kind of the patient care first and really giving people the support network that they need to kind of change for the better.
Nick, I totally agree. And I mean, we should be doing these things now, not waiting to be reactionary to it. We should be very, very proactive about how we're going to tackle these things. And look, you're someone who I look up to. I love the coaching conversation. I feel like I got some coaching today. I really learned a lot from the discussion, and you've got a partner in us to help in every way we can and keep doing all this great work. So thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, always an honor. I appreciate spending time with you, Ross.
Thanks, Nick.